I'll just say this. I teach 7th grade. They are still performing on the 4th grade level.
Seventh grade English teacher here. I teach in Northern Houston, and I teach at one of the more affluent schools. When I tell you that these babies cannot read, they cannot write, and they cannot comprehend, I'm not being funny. I'm being dead serious.
Wow.
It doesn't exist. I have kids constantly asking me, how do I spell window? How do I spell important? How do I spell though? And they be serious. They're dead serious. I could ask them, who is the main character of your story? The story of 4-paragraph story we just read. Can't tell you. They don't know. They don't know.
Darkness.
They don't know. It took us 4 weeks to get through how to answer a question in a complete sentence.
That's no joke.
Okay, so there's this crisis is not in a vacuum. Meaning, what's happening right now is that there's 2 schools in Vista, California, where I live, 2 elementary schools that are getting shut down right now because of lower enrollments and lower test scores. That's not good for people that can't afford to homeschool their kids, drive their kids to a charter school, do some sort of hybrid program, or do private school. So what does that mean? That means that some kids are going to get left behind because the public schools, the public elementary schools, are falling so far behind, and that means that the kids that actually need that, or the parents that need that come from lower income families, they're going to be at a disadvantage, unfortunately. And there are a lot of them already feel like they're at a disadvantage, feel like they're being left behind. And the reality that these kids are struggling is huge because it is not in a vacuum. These folks are going to grow up.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to get into high school. They're going to hit puberty. These boys are going to become young men. They're going to become young men who can inflict harm and do damage. And so my question is, do these kids eventually catch up, or do they stay locked in this crisis? Do they eventually turn it around and get things together, or do they stay behind in remedial? In my case, this is a little personal for me because some of you guys may not know this. English is my second language. And I couldn't really read until like 8th grade. And I didn't really learn how to like really, you know how you could like read sentences? I could like start to read sentences cognitively in like 8th grade. I couldn't really read and visualize what I'm reading, like from a narrative standpoint, until 9th grade. And it was 2 things that got me reading. It was the Bible, and it was a Stephen King novel called Desperation. And oddly enough, that's like I was in desperation. I need to learn how to read. And that was what got me reading.
There you go.
And those are the 2 things that actually got me. It's the end of my freshman year. I struggled. Like I struggled heavily because 1, English is a second language to me. And then 2, like my mom was so checked out. My dad was gone. And that I didn't really have to learn how to read and apply myself. And so what I did was I actually just memorized the books and fake read them as the teachers read them to me.
Awesome.
And I was the dude that was in the, English is a second language class. I was the dude that was that always would get the extra tutors and the extra one-on-one help in elementary school. And it was bad. But thankfully for me, I bounced out of it. Like freshman year, I kind of figured it out. And I was able to I don't know if it was self-taught or maybe it's just interesting. I found something that I wanted to read that was interesting because I felt like everything the teachers were shoving down my throat, I just was not interested.
Yeah.
I just thought like, this is stupid. I don't want to read these books. These books are from 50 years ago. And I just had no desire to read. So I'm curious if these kids will turn it around because they have to. They're forced to. Or is there just going to be a generation of people that are left behind? And what is that going to do for the kids who are being brought up in a charter school, homeschool, private school, or just moving to a better school and district? What is it going to do to those kids? And is that just going to increase the gap?
Homeschool is going to be the new college education.
Oh, for sure.
That's crazy.
What people don't know about homeschool or charter school or hybrid school is that you can start taking college courses in like 8th or 9th grade, and you could double dip, meaning that like I know people who are homeschooled or like hybrid, and they would start taking English 100, and they would get those units. Those units would double as high school units, meaning they get twice high school units, and they would double towards their, what's it called? Your general ed.
General ed, yeah.
Gosh.
GED.
So I know quite a few people that were homeschooled that graduated high school with their first 2 years of college completely done. had their bachelor's by 19, had their master's by like 21, 22.
Yikes.
Again, if we fast forward 50 years into the future, who do you think is going to be crushing it on an education level? Who do you think is going to be crushing it on an income level? Who do you think is going to be crushing it on a stability level? Probably kids of people of faith, right? Who are like, I'm not dealing with these crazy schools. Like y'all talking about theory and all this goofy stuff.
Yeah.
I'm out. And their kids are going to unperform, right? And their kids are going to unperform. And then you're just going to have more and more of this disparity, which, from one standpoint, the disparity is going to get worse, which means that there's going to be less people who have the capacity and the capability of building wealth. From another standpoint, the higher relative poverty, the more tension there is on a society, the more the society can collapse. Because now I have to drive past the nice neighborhoods to go to my poor school. And now I develop this envy to these kids who had the quote unquote silver spoon in their mouth because their parents cared about them, because their parents educated them, right? It's going to create these disparities. And so I just think of society 50 years from now, and what does that look like?
It also probably means that the road to success is probably more linear. If there's a larger amount of uneducated people that don't know how to process things and comprehend and compete in the marketplace, and you were homeschooled, and you have those skills and abilities through good parenting, then it's just time. It's just consistency.
Sure.
It's like, oh, I can just be consistent. I can rise to the top.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, time, consistency, the skills, the ability. Really what this comes down to is you got to learn to learn. If you can learn to learn, then even if there's a shift in the market and there's a disruption for your skill set, and say you are, hey, I'm going to go and do this and build this thing, but then AI comes around or something shift. You could if you learn to learn and you know how to learn new things, you could just learn new things and just keep evolving as someone that's contributing to the marketplace. But if you already struggle to learn, what the heck is that going to do for you when you're 25, when you're 30, and you can't learn new skills because you never learned to learn. You never learned to critically think. You were just indoctrinated in all this nonsense as a middle school kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the fact that these kids aren't performing well on the basics, but they're learning all this theory and all this gender ideology stuff, which is like mandatory. In terms of the elementary and the middle school kids, the protest in Glendale by the Armenians and in Maryland by the Muslims was because they couldn't opt out of gender ideology stuff, like gender history,
crazy,
so on and so forth, right? Why not private school instead of homeschool? Because private school costs a lot of money, and homeschool
is like
you get curriculum. Because what homeschool is, they give you a percentage of what they would pay the school, because the federal government pays the local school you go to a certain amount of money. I want to say it's like $12,000 a year, $10,000 a year, something like that. And some of that gets reallocated if you're homeschooling, and then you got to go buy curriculum and buy electives. When people say school choice, what they're really saying is just give me that $12,000 and let me pick where I want to.
It's $12,000 per student.
It's $12,000 per student per year, something like that. So if I got school choice and I could get that $12,000 back, then I could send my son to the private school he wants to go to, or to and pay half of it.
Is that a thing now?
School choice just became a thing I want to say in Arizona. I think Arizona is trying it. It's a very conservative thing.
Super.
People say it would create more disparities in education, because people say, well, the parents that need to go and get a free education for their kids, and may need school lunches, they can't afford to send their kids to the nicer school across town.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be more difficult for them, right? Well, that is true to an extent, right? They can't afford that. The flip side to that is, well, let the schools compete. Let the school compete for our dollars. Right? Let the schools compete for our dollars. How much does Americans pay for normal school? So again, the average school, I want to say, Google it real quick. I want to say it's about $12,000 a year that the average school gets for kids elementary. So if there's drop-offs, which is what's happening here in Vista, 2 elementary schools are closing this year. If there's drop-offs because more and more kids are going to charter schools, private schools, homeschools, well, guess what's going to happen? And by the way, we don't get that money for homeschooling. We only get a percentage of it. California raised, they're spending $13,000 per student in state and local funding. So $13,000 per state and local funding is what you get in California. But they don't. Again, school choice would be give that $13,000 to the parents and let the parents decide where their kids go, instead of giving it to failing schools. Right? Am I accurate? California ranked 33rd in 2019-2020, spending $13,684 per student in state and local funding. Now, the local funding is important because local taxes fund students, Local taxes fund students. California has lower local property taxes. That's why we are 33rd, right? We have higher state taxes, but lower property taxes. That was $1,700 below the national average of $15,000, about half the $26,000 in peer pupil funding in New York. It's also $1,000 per student higher than 40th place Texas, a source of frequent comparison and bragging rights. That's interesting. I'm saying all these things just to say like these things are going to affect people long term.
That's crazy.
Super sad. Super sad. We see according to the Bible that prayer is extremely important in terms of us being transformed from the inside out when we get aligned with God's will. For the Christians watching this channel, I want you guys to implement these spiritual disciplines in your day-to-day life. And the only way I've been able to do this consistently is through writing down my prayers in a prayer journal that does a few things. One, it allows me to reflect and come to God humbly and ask him to move on my behalf. And two, it allows me to document my prayers, which ultimately help me remember the very things that I was praying for and see the hand of God tangibly in my life when he answers them. So I would urge you, consider writing down your prayers. It could be in a blank notebook. It could even be on your phone. Or you could check out the one I personally designed and used from my own quiet time and spiritual discipline that I think will be a huge blessing. It's the exact structure and system that I've used for years to pray and be more consistent in my spiritual disciplines. You can pick yours up today by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.